For over a century, archaeology told us a story, a neat, comfortable, widely accepted explanation for how humans first arrived in the Americas. According to that story, around 13,000 years ago, Ice Age hunters crossed a frozen land bridge from Siberia into North America. For decades, that timeline appeared in textbooks, university classrooms, and museums around the world. It became the foundation of one of archaeology's most accepted theories. But then, in 2021, a series of mysterious footprints emerged from the mud of an ancient dried-up lake in New Mexico. At first, they looked ordinary, until scientists tried to determine their age. If the evidence was correct, those footprints didn't just challenge a long-standing theory. They forced archaeologists to ask a question many thought had already been answered. Had one of history's oldest timelines been incomplete all along? These aren't just ancient footprints, they're the ghost trails of a forgotten world. And the story they tell may change the way we understand the first Americans. The sacred dogma, the Clovis First theory. To understand why the White Sands discovery shocked archaeologists, you first have to understand the theory it challenged. For decades, the dominant explanation for the first peopling of the Americas was known as the Clovis First theory. It all began in the late 1920s, when archaeologists discovered distinctive stone spear points near Clovis, New Mexico. Radiocarbon dating placed them at roughly 13,000 years old at the time. They represented the oldest widely accepted evidence of humans in North America. From that discovery, an entire timeline was built. During the last ice age, sea levels dropped dramatically, exposing a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, known as Beringia. Researchers believed early hunters crossed this bridge, following herds of mammoths and bison into a new continent. But there was one major obstacle. Massive ice sheets, some nearly 2 miles thick, covered much of present-day Canada. According to the traditional model, travel farther south wasn't possible until those glaciers began to retreat, opening an ice-free corridor around 13,000 years ago. For decades, this explanation fit the available evidence remarkably well. As a result, claims of significantly earlier human occupation were often met with skepticism because the supporting evidence wasn't considered strong enough. To many archaeologists, the debate seemed largely settled until a dried-up lakebed in New Mexico revealed something nobody expected. Not ancient tools, not human bones, just a series of footprints, waiting silently beneath the sand. And when scientists finally tried to determine when those footprints were made, the mystery became much bigger than anyone had imagined. The ghost prints of White Sands. Welcome to White Sands National Park in New Mexico. Today, it's one of the most extraordinary landscapes in America. Endless waves of brilliant white gypsum stretch to the horizon, making the desert look almost like snow. But 23,000 years ago, this place looked nothing like it does today. Instead of dry dunes, there was a vast wetland surrounding an ancient lake known as Lake Otero. It was home to an incredible variety of Ice Age animals: mammoths, giant ground sloths, dire wolves, ancient camels, and many other species that disappeared thousands of years ago. For years, park rangers occasionally noticed something unusual. After heavy rain, strange footprints would briefly appear in the muddy ground. Then, as the surface dried, they vanished again. Locals began calling them The ghost prints. No one knew exactly how old they were or who had left them behind. Then, in 2016, a team of researchers decided to investigate. What they uncovered was unlike anything they expected. Not dozens of footprints, not even hundreds, but thousands. Human footprints, preserved beneath layer after layer of ancient sediment. Some belonged to adults, others to teenagers. Many were left by small children. This wasn't a single trackway. It was an entire landscape. Frozen in time, some trails stretched for more than a mile, others crossed one another, as if families had walked through this ancient wetland together. Even more astonishing, several human footprints crossed the tracks of mammoths and giant ground sloths for the first time. Scientists weren't just looking at artifacts left behind by ancient people, they were looking at the people themselves, captured in the middle of everyday life. But as remarkable as these footprints were, they still couldn't answer the one question that mattered most. When were they made? Because if they were as old as some researchers suspected, they wouldn't just reveal a forgotten moment from the Ice Age, they would force archaeologists to rethink one of the oldest chapters of American history, the timeline that challenged everything. Discovering the footprints was extraordinary, but footprints alone couldn't rewrite history. To understand their significance, scientists first had to answer one critical question: how old were they? Unlike bones or pieces of wood, a footprint can't be dated directly, so researchers searched for organic material buried within the same layers of sediment. They found something unexpected: tiny seeds from an ancient aquatic plant called Rupia cirrhosa. The seeds were carefully collected from layers both above and below the footprints. If those sediment layers had remained undisturbed, the seeds could reveal when the footprints were made. The samples were sent to specialized laboratories. The team expected the dates to fall somewhere close to the accepted timeline, around 13,000 years ago. But when the results came back, the researchers checked them again. Then they tested additional samples because the numbers didn't match anyone's expectations. 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. For a moment, it was difficult to believe. If those dates were accurate, humans were already living in what is now New Mexico during the last glacial maximum, the coldest period of the last Ice Age. According to the traditional migration model, that raised an enormous question. How could people already be living thousands of miles south, when massive ice sheets still covered much of northern North America? The discovery quickly attracted worldwide attention. Some researchers described it as one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in decades. Others urged caution. Could the dating be trusted, or was there another explanation? Some scientists suggested the ancient aquatic seeds might have absorbed older carbon from the lake, potentially making them appear older than the footprints themselves. It was a serious scientific question, and if it proved to be true, the entire discovery would have to be reconsidered. The debate had officially begun, but the research team wasn't finished. Instead of defending their conclusion with the same evidence, they decided to test it using completely different methods. And what those new tests revealed made the mystery even harder to ignore. The human story, hidden in the mud. The dates were astonishing, but the real magic of White Sands wasn't hidden in a laboratory. It was hidden in the footprints themselves. Because unlike ancient tools or broken bones, footprints capture a single moment in time, almost like a photograph. As researchers mapped thousands of tracks, they realized they weren't looking at random footprints. They were looking at the movements of real people. Some belonged to adults, others to teenagers. Many were left by children. One particular trackway immediately stood out. It stretched for more than a mile. The walker wasn't wandering. The stride was long, steady, and purposeful. The footprints were also unusually deep, suggesting the person was carrying something heavy. Then, something unexpected happened. For a short distance, tiny footprints appeared beside the larger ones. A small child had been placed on the ground, only for a few steps. Then, the child's footprints disappeared. The deeper adult footprints returned. Whoever made that journey had picked the child up again and continued walking. More than 20,000 years later, that ordinary moment was still preserved beneath the sand. No names, no language, no written history. Just a person carrying a child across an Ice Age landscape. The discoveries didn't end there. Researchers also found human footprints crossing the tracks of mammoths and giant ground sloths. One sequence became especially famous. A giant ground sloth appeared to approach a human trackway, then suddenly changed direction, even rising onto its hind legs before moving away. Researchers believe the animal may have reacted after detecting nearby humans. If that interpretation is correct, these footprints preserve one of the oldest known interactions between humans and Ice Age megafauna. It wasn't just archaeology anymore, it was a glimpse into everyday life, captured more than 20,000 years ago. But while these footprints revealed how these people lived, they still couldn't answer an even bigger question. If humans were already here, how did they reach America in the first place? Because according to everything scientists thought they knew, that journey shouldn't have been possible. The debate and the evidence. A discovery this extraordinary was never going to be accepted without scrutiny. The moment the White Sands study was published, questions began pouring in from archaeologists around the world, not because they wanted the discovery to be wrong, but because that's how science works. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. The biggest concern centered on one possibility, something known as the reservoir effect. Some scientists argued that the ancient aquatic plant used for radiocarbon dating may have absorbed older carbon from the lake. If that had happened, the seeds could appear thousands of years older than they actually were, and if the seeds were older, the footprints might not be. It was a legitimate scientific challenge, one that couldn't be answered with opinions, only with more evidence. So the research team went back to White Sands. This time, they didn't rely on aquatic seeds alone. Instead, they analyzed ancient pollen grains preserved within the same sediment layers. Unlike aquatic plants, these pollen grains weren't affected by the same reservoir concerns. Then, the team used an entirely different dating technique, optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, rather than dating organic material. OSL measures the last time tiny quartz grains were exposed to sunlight before being buried. Two completely different methods, two completely independent lines of evidence. If either one produced a very different age, the original discovery would become much harder to defend. But when the results came back, they pointed to the same remarkable conclusion: an age of approximately 21,000 to 23,000 years. The new studies didn't end every scientific discussion. That's rarely how science works. But they significantly strengthened the case that the White Sands footprints truly belong to the height of the last ice age. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. If people were already living in North America 23,000 years ago, how many other chapters of human history are still waiting to be discovered? The White Sands footprints didn't just uncover ancient human tracks, they uncovered an ancient question. For generations, we believed we understood when the first people arrived in the Americas. Today, that story appears far more complex than anyone once imagined. If humans were already living in North America more than 21,000 years ago, how did they get here? Did they travel along the Pacific coastline, long before the glaciers began to retreat? Did they arrive in multiple waves, using routes we still haven't discovered? Or are the most important pieces of this story still buried beneath deserts, hidden beneath forests, or resting beneath coastlines now covered by the ocean? The truth is, history isn't a finished book. Every new discovery has the potential to reshape what we thought we knew, and White Sands is a reminder that science doesn't stand still. It constantly questions, tests, and refines our understanding of the past as new evidence emerges. Perhaps the most fascinating part of this story isn't the footprints we've already found, it's the discoveries we haven't found yet. Because somewhere, another piece of humanity's past may still be waiting beneath our feet, and when it's finally uncovered, we may once again be forced to ask the same question. How much of history is still waiting to be rewritten? If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Decoded History for more stories about the discoveries that changed our understanding of the world. And let us know in the comments. Do you think humans reached the Americas even earlier than the White Sands footprints suggest? Because the next discovery might change everything once again.